Well, good morning. Happy All Saints Day. I don't think they originally meant All Saints Day to refer to you, but you are the saints of God, and so this is your day. Now, I wish the Catholic Church would actually teach about these saints on All Saints Day, or on whatever the Saints Day happens to be in the Catholic calendar, because we got some really magnificent Christians in the past, and if we would learn from them, it would be good. But we Protestants, we don't want to know anything about that. But it would be good for our understanding. Oh, maybe I need to turn this on, and then it might work. And then maybe it won't. Does it need a battery? There it goes. Just needed the tech guy to come up. This, Sean, what is this? What is it next to it there? What's that? It's a site plan. Sean works at the town of Hopewell, and somebody will come in and say, I need something approved by next Friday. And then what do you tell them?
No.
What do they have to do?
What do they have to do?
Mm-hmm.
Oh my goodness. They need to give us money.
Of course, taxes.
They need to set up a public hearing notice. They need to get a sign for under review. We need to know if they need variances or special use permits, what type of site plan it is, and go from there.
So this is a free country, right?
Unless you're dealing with municipalities, yeah.
God has a plan. Jim, you recognize this? This was a gift from Jim, but obviously he didn't care the least bit about it, or he would know what it is. This is a view of Canandaigua, and it's kind of hard to see on the screen, but if you look, see, here's the courthouse up here, and then the Canandaigua Hotel was where the police station is today. That burned down, I think, in 1970, but it was a nice hotel for years, and you actually had a view of the lake when you checked in there. The interesting thing about Canandaigua is that it probably, if not the first, but one of the very first villages in the United States that was built according to a plan. Now, if you go to Canandaigua, there are a couple small, narrow streets, but that's because they encroached on the street when they built. But initially, if you look at the plot of the Phelps and Gorham Purchase, it looks like this main street goes up crooked, but it goes up at true north, or maybe magnetic north, one or the other. I don't know, it's pretty close. It goes north, and then all of the lots were divided off east and west, exactly. Have you ever been to Dansville? The main village itself is okay, but when you get out in the area where the car dealers and the fast food and stuff is, it's all like, there's roads that just very, very, very poor planning. So Canandaigua was a planned village because it was the center of the area where all the lots were sold off once the white people came here. And so it was done very methodically. And Phelps and Gorham had their land office here in Canandaigua. And Canandaigua, the town of Canandaigua, is different from other towns in the sense that it's twice as big. Every other town is 6 miles by 6 miles square, and Canandaigua is 6 miles by 12 miles. Of course, at some point on the other side of the lake, they ceded some of it to Gorham because they couldn't really control the east side of the lake, and so they just turned it over to Gorham. And then in West Bloomfield, as you're going towards Lima, they eventually made the Honeoye Creek the line, even though the original line went into Livingston County. It was all Ontario County. So everything was planned. And it was a pretty good plan. It's a nice place to live, isn't it? God has a plan for each of us. What is God's will? Do you know you can perfectly know what God's will is if you look at the scriptures, because it's very clear what God's will is. For this reason, since the day we heard it, we have not ceased praying for you. Now, this is from the book of Colossians, and Colossians is unusual in the writings of St. Paul in that the church in Colossae was not founded by Paul. It was founded by a guy named Epaphras. And so there came a point in time where Paul became aware of this church in this place, and immediately he felt like he should write a letter to them and say, hey, I'm praying for you. Even though they weren't under his oversight, he still felt it necessary to communicate with them and establish a relationship with them. And so he says, as soon as we heard it, we've not ceased praying for you and asking that you may be filled with the knowledge of God's will in all spiritual wisdom and understanding. Spiritual wisdom. Spiritual wisdom is a little bit different from man's wisdom. I mean, man's wisdom is acquire, be greedy, look out for number one first and get yourself ahead and never mind about everybody else. But spiritual wisdom is a little bit different. It's a love your neighbor as yourself. It's get your insides cleaned up a little bit as you walk day by day. And so as Paul immediately contacts these people, he says to them, I've been praying that you would have a proper knowledge of God's will in all spiritual wisdom and understanding. How will this come about in our life? Is there anything that we have to do? What do you say, Priscilla? Read the word, which you mean by the word you mean the Bible, right? But I don't understand it.
Go to CBS. Get some help.
Because, there's some things you can do to help you understand the Bible. And you're never going to understand the Bible when you just come into it and you just start. You're not going to understand what the Bible says because it's 66 books written by like 45 different people over 3,000 years. It speaks to different things at different times. And so unless you have some methodology, you can start in Matthew, but where people always start? They start in Genesis. You know why? Because that's the beginning of the Bible. And they get up to like chapter 4, and then there's a list of 16 begots with names that we can't pronounce. And they close the Bible up and I can't understand it. That's not a good place to start with the Bible. But there are things, there are precepts. There are certain understandings that are first. And the first understanding is that we are a created world with created creatures, animals and humans, and that God had a purpose. And there is something that he has planned. So we have to start with the basic precept. If we don't have that, then we're not going to be able to build anything wise on top of it. So what is God's will? God's will is that you will have spiritual wisdom and understanding. And my father told me, and I think this is really true, wisdom is the ability to see the possible consequences of your actions. Is that a good definition? I think it is. If I step on that ice that's this thick, it might not be a good idea. We go to school and we learn physics. We know that two objects cannot be in the same place at the same time. And then wisdom is to use that knowledge in your driving. See, knowledge is one thing and wisdom is another. And so Paul's prayer for these people is that they would have some spiritual wisdom and they would have some spiritual understanding. That you may lead lives worthy of the Lord, pleasing to him. Now, I was reading about a guy named George Dunkle. And George lived over in Hopewell. And he's buried in Hopewell. And I always knew about this guy because he owned the property that my former pastor owned, and the church was built on that property that was 100 years ago owned by this guy, George Dunkle. And one of his friends or one of his followers, they were called Dunkleites. And so the pastor always said, this property was used by God previously, and, we're fulfilling the prophecy, or we're fulfilling God's will on the property. And so many years ago, I found the book, which was written about his life. And I found that he alone was right. Dunkle's attitude was, I am the only one in the town of Hopewell that has the right theology. His brother-in-law was the Methodist minister. His father-in-law was his name escapes me, but his father-in-law was the first Methodist person to come here, and he was over the whole region, and he was ordained in 1803. That was his father-in-law, and then his brother-in-law was a minister from Shortsville, and he ended up being a missionary to Japan and died in Japan. And now this guy Dunkle is he's married to Gideon Draper's name was. He's married to Draper's daughter. And so, but he's against the Methodists, which his brother-in-law and his father-in-law are, and he changed and he became a Wesleyan. And then he knew all what the Wesleyans were all wrong about what they thought. And so he alone was right. And he had this, you have to come to me and you have to agree. And what his thing was is that he was teaching that people had to achieve sinlessness. Have any of you achieved sinlessness? You aren't going to. But he achieved sinlessness. And so therefore, he alone was right. And this whole book that the woman wrote about him is really, it's about her and not him. It's about her struggle to try to achieve the sinlessness that he preached. But the problem with him is that for example, he had a lot of enemies. You could imagine having a lot of enemies in town when you point out that the pastors and all the people that go to the Methodist church and all the people that go to the Wesleyan church are not saved. So that's going to cause you a problem in life. That's not wisdom, is it? Would it be wise for me to stand up and say, well, this church doesn't believe what I believe about this, so they're wrong, and that church doesn't believe what I believe about, so they're wrong? Is that wisdom? I remember a guy came in here. I'm off track totally here. A guy came in here one time when I first came, and he sat in the back. And his name was David, and maybe Clarice and Janice will remember David. He was the son of somebody that went to church here at the time. And he came in and he sat in the back. There was a corner back there that you could sit in those days. And he was back there like, and I said to Jim Leffenow, what's with that guy? And he said, you're using the wrong version of the Bible. And he was one of those King James only guys. And if you didn't use the King James, then you're some sort of sinner. Because they couldn't prove what they wanted to prove out of the newer versions, based in English. The King James version is the perfect translation. We don't need any Greek. And he gave me this book on all the evils of every other Bible. He alone was right. That's not wisdom. You're not going to win people that way. That you may live lives worthy. I mean, that to have an attitude like that is not a good testimony. Fully pleasing to him as you bear fruit in every good work, as you grow in the knowledge of God. Now, people sometimes will say, well, so-and-so comes to church and they're living in sin. Okay. They're not, you can't be a church member and do that, but you can come and you can be a part. And as long as you're going in the right direction, if you're going towards God, I'm okay with it. If you're going away from God, I'm not okay with it. And God's not okay with it. We have to be open for people to change. Who among you has even gotten halfway towards perfection in the years that you've been a Christian? I mean, we're all going in the right way, hopefully, but we haven't achieved yet. And so we have to be able to look back and see where people are and bring them to where they need to go, and not just clobber them because they're not living the way we think they should be living. Because that's not wisdom, to clobber somebody as soon as they come in the door. Well, you don't have the right Bible, so I'm not going to even listen to anything you've got to say. Or, I don't like your music. I don't know if you're aware of this, but I'll tell you this so that you know. Music. When they introduced the organ into the churches in Europe, it was scandalous. You can't have that in a church. The voices of the people of God are the only music that should be allowed in the church. And then the organ became the standard. And then they introduced the piano. Oh my goodness. You can't have piano in the church. Did anybody ever read the story of the temple in the Old Testament? Or read the book of Psalms where 50 different instruments are mentioned and people with the talent in all the different instruments? But there are some people that won't come to church that has an instrumentation like this. They like the old. Now, I like some of the old. Now, Trina, when I said I don't like any of it, I do like some of it. I like the Wesleyan stuff, the old 4,000 tongues, the Isaac Watts stuff. There's really some very good music from the past that is theologically correct, and I like it. But it doesn't necessarily relate very well to younger people. And you know what? The stuff that we like right now, the stuff that we're playing right now, the next generation won't like it. And we better be prepared to turn it over to them, because that would be wisdom. So it's all good. I mean, that song that you played today, when I first came here, Keith, and Clarice and Janice and Linda can testify, this church sang that song every single week as we went out when I came. Do you remember that, Linda? The blessed be the tie that binds. And it was nice because you came to your service, and then you realized as you went home for the week, and all your friends are serving God during the week as well. And so it was nice, but it got very repetitive. And it's a good song, but it kind of wore me out. But it was really nice to hear it again today, because it is good. It's the tie that binds is God. So we need to have wisdom in these things so that we can bear fruit for every good work. We're expected to do good works. We are expected to do for our neighbor. We're expected to do for the people that we are working with. They should be able to see a difference in us, and they should be able to see where we were and where we're going. If they knew us before we accepted Christ, and then they should be able to see that we're going in the right direction, and that's a testimony in and of itself. So Paul is praying for these people concerning this thing. Grow in the knowledge of God. I went to kindergarten in Victor. And then I went to the West Lake Road School in Canandaigua down here on the lake by Butler Road for first grade. I'm the last person alive that went to a one-room schoolhouse. It was grades 1 through 4. Okay, except for Mike. And his education is also deficient. But I had a problem when I went to Bloomfield, because in Bloomfield, they taught phonics, and our teacher down here that Mike had, Mrs. Spike, she taught sight reading. This is what cat looks like. This is what dog looks like. And that's how, did she teach you to read that way? And so when I got to Bloomfield, they were doing phonics, and I was lost because I was in first grade or in second grade, because they took first grade down here, and I couldn't do it. And it's like that new math they're doing now. I can add 15 and 65 easily. I can do it in my head, but I can't do that stupid thing. And why would you need to? Anyway, but that's beside the point. You can? Okay. Well, 65 and 15, I don't need that chart to do it. Grow in the knowledge. How are we going to grow if we don't learn the elementary things? It says in one place that the law has become our schoolmaster to lead us to Christ. Okay? Thou shalt and thou shalt not, 10 of them with variations. And when we break those, then we understand that we need Jesus. Okay, I understand that. The law has become our schoolmaster to lead us to Christ. However, 2 plus 2 is still 4. 3 plus 3 is still 6. They're elementary principles that we base our understanding upon. And so if we don't have a proper foundation, then we're not going to get where we need to be. May you be made strong with all the strength that comes from his glorious power. This is an important thing. We're not really well suited to do anything spiritually on our own. We need help. That's why the Holy Spirit has come. Jesus said the Spirit will come and will teach you, lead you into all truth. We need, it's a spiritual thing. It's not a head thing. It has to get inside somehow. And that's why conversion is necessary. And that's why we have to make a decision and say yes to Jesus. Because you have to start with a spiritual thing. Jesus said those who don't have the Spirit are not able to know spiritual things. Nicodemus came and said, Lord, we know that you've done all these miracles and stuff. And Jesus said, well, the wind blows where it wills. And you don't know where it's coming from or where it's going. So is everyone who is led by the Spirit. You need you can't see it, but you can experience it and you can feel it. And by the way, in Greek, the word wind and spirit and breath are all the same word. They have one word for 3 things. So he's talking about the breath of God. He's talking about the Spirit of God and the wind of God. And so how do we get that? We get that by exercise. I'm not a great exerciser. Once it comes to demons, I'm a good demon exerciser, but I'm not a good exerciser. I started to run track in Bloomfield. Now that was probably not a good idea because I was smoking a pack of cigarettes every day. Old Golds. They were my favorite. They had the coupon that you could save and send and get stuff. I never sent and got anything with them, and they looked at me and they said, well, this guy probably isn't going to run track. He's probably not going to do it. And so everybody else had a blue uniform, but I had an old white uniform that was discarded from the previous year. And when I ran my first 440, it wasn't a relay, it was a full 440. And when I came across the line at the end, there was a girl there laughing at me. And that was it. Quit. But the problem is that I had not done what I needed to do. I had not built up the endurance that I needed to do. What I needed to do was run that 440 every day, and then for a couple weeks, and then I needed to start to run the 440 a couple times a day. Now, when Gene's son came here, he's over next door, we had the 5K race here in Cheshire. And Gene's son won the race. And he came early, and he ran the whole 5K. And then he was standing there when the race was ready. And he won the race because He actually ran 10K that day. And I would have been dead if I'd run, 2K, because I didn't have the stamina and the endurance. And so, spiritually speaking, it's important to keep with it. It's important to have a habit of Bible reading and have a habit of praying, and not just asking God for things, but listening to what God would say to you. I mentioned last week about habits, how I'm still reaching for that cord, even though my light turns on and off automatically now. So it's a habitual thing. Prepare to endure everything. That includes people telling you you're stupid and all that persecution stuff. Not getting the promotion because you're a Christian, all that type of thing. Giving thanks to the Father who's enabled you to share the inheritance. Now, I have the good fortune of, my father died when he was 50. And after he died, his parents and relatives died, his aunt and uncle that had no kids. And when it came time to reading the will, guess what? And when my grandmother died, guess what? Nothing. They open the will, the remaining children get it all. We got nothing. That was very disappointing. Very irritating. A little bit angering, because we felt, well, we should have gotten Dad's share and divided it by 3. Were you irritated by this, Kelly? No. Didn't bother her a bit. It bothered me. I stood up from the lawyer's office and said, see ya. And they said, where are you going? I said, I don't need to know what the rest of it says because I'm not involved. No inheritance. But imagine you're at home and the mail comes and there's a certified letter in there and it says that somebody that you didn't even know passed away and you get the inheritance. Would that be cool? Pardon me? This happened. My aunt, my grandmother's sister, had no children, and she and her husband had left something to some person that was a friend of theirs who died 30 years ago. Am I telling this truth? Is this the way it went? Aunt Marion. And it was left to this person that had died, and their children or grandchildren ended up with it. And we're like, so they literally went to the mailbox and found out that they were inheriting something from somebody that they didn't even know. And that's the way Christianity is, because we didn't know Jesus, and he died and left us an inheritance. And we should be happy about it, I would think. He's enabled you to share. So there's something about what he did more important than about what we did when it comes to this. He rescued us from the power of darkness and transferred us into the kingdom of his beloved Son. Rescued and transferred. You used to be part of the world. Now you've been selected and transferred into the kingdom of God. I mean, how many of you like transfers at the airport? I don't. But this is a good transfer. Boy, I'm running out of time here, aren't I? Go ahead, please. Oh, see? Habit. There we go. In whom we have redemption and the forgiveness of sins. So, what is the prayer? That you might understand what knowledge and wisdom are, and that you might grow in the right direction, that you might receive the inheritance that the other people of God are receiving, and that you might receive the forgiveness of sins. And so Mr. Dunkle thought that you needed the forgiveness of sins and then you had to become perfect. That's incorrect. You have to be walking on towards perfection and acting upon the light that you have. But they used to say in Bible school, sanctification is instantaneous and progressive. God instantaneously sets us apart for himself, but we have to walk progressively towards that goal of being more and more like Jesus. Is there anybody that would like to say yes to Jesus today? To start that walk? If not, you can see me afterwards if you don't want to do anything publicly. Anybody have any comments on this? I explained it so completely, totally. Wow, I did a great job, didn't I? You got to have somebody that has to tickle somebody somewhere, right? Exactly.
Life, and it's not going to be easy, but we're not alone. And the goal isn't, getting the most or being the best. It's drawing closer to God, and we get that through our life experiences, through prayer, through education, through spending time with God and listening to God, coming to church and being with each other and helping each other through our lives, right? We have our own, but we also are here as a family. So I think it's important to realize that it's not just about us. It's about all of us and what
The next generation as well.
I was going to say, what inheritance are we leaving for our children and our grandchildren spiritually?
And it's certainly not about cleaning ourselves up so that we can look down upon somebody else, which is what Dunkle's problem was. Anyone else? So nice to see everybody today. God bless you. If you need to talk, I'll be around. Have a great day, and we'll see you next time. Oh, go ahead. We're gonna sing "Blessed Be the Tie That Binds" as a tradition.
We won't do it every week.